increasing the price of alcohol at these very cheaper end of the market actually targets the poorer buyers, doesn't it? Not drinkers. For instance, the heavy drinkers who take a couple of bottles of Pinot Grigio home each evening.
Well, interestingly, the evidence from Scotland shows that 83% of heavy drinkers are drinking the cheap alcohol. Right. So actually, it's going to have far more impact. The evidence suggests that actually it will reduce drinking among people, moderate drinkers, by about 1%, whereas it's going to reduce drinking among heavy drinkers by about 5%. Now, that has an impact on all of us, because don't forget that we're talking about 1,000 lives saved if we delay minimum unit pricing in England for 5 years, thousands of hospital admissions saved, and we all pay for those hospital admissions through the NHS. So actually not introducing minimum unit pricing means we're all paying through the NHS.
Matt, we should do it in England as well, because it would save 1,000 lives.
I mean, this is definitely the thin end of a wedge. Health campaigners in England and in Wales have both called for governments to introduce it after Scotland, despite the fact that there's no evidence yet.
There is evidence. There's very good evidence in British Columbia, the Royal College of GPs,
I'm really glad you mentioned
British
British Columbia, because in British Columbia the evidence doesn't work.
The evidence is that it does work very clearly, and we also know alcohol is 50% cheaper than it was in 1980, and in every country where they increase alcohol, they increase the price of alcohol, it reduces heavy drinking more than it reduces
Well,
other people's
actually,
drinking.
in 2016, a study found that it didn't impact heavy drinkers. It impacted very heavily moderate drinkers, but heavy drinkers have an elasticity of about 0. So actually, all it does is makes them choose between eating and drinking, and they choose poorly. They choose to drink, and all this does.
Is there evidence for that? Because that would be a disaster if actually people who are the problem drinkers simply then save the money on the food that is good for them, of course, and drink the alcohol which is killing them.
The sadness, I have patients who already do that, and yes, there is a risk for a tiny, tiny proportion, but what we're going to do is we're going to stop the people who would become the heavy drinkers in the future. It is a thin end of the wedge, you're absolutely right. The fact that alcohol is currently getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, the cheaper it gets, the thin end of the wedge is, the cheaper it gets, the more problems we have at the heavy end, and those are the very people who can't afford it.
I mean, Nicola Sturgeon is right. Today, the eyes of the world are on Scotland.
Yeah.
But what will the world see? It'll see a government on one hand Presbyterianly wagging its finger and telling people that they shouldn't have a drink that they enjoy, and that they should be punished for that. On the other hand, it will be picking their pockets. So those people who buy...
What would you say would be the better alternative then? If you don't think that this is a good idea, do you acknowledge that heavy drinking is a problem and kills
if we want to
people?
get rid of the negative externality of problem drinking and the costs on the NHS, the best mechanism is through the tax system.
Sorry, could you explain negative externality?
Sorry, so the extra costs that the society bears because of the choices of individuals.
Yeah.
So those surgeries and the treatments that people have at the NHS, because moderate drinking and problem drinking are spread right across society. So those MSPs that are having their bottle of Beaujolais tonight are also more likely to be just as likely to be alcoholic as someone on low income. But they're not going to get hit by this. They get to go home with their Churchillian spirits and enjoy them, whereas people on poorer incomes are going to be made a lot worse off after this change.
The evidence is against you. A lot of people who drink moderately are drinking in pubs and clubs and so on, and they are not going to have any impact on the cost of their alcohol.
No, you're just going to hit the people who want to drink at home, who want to enjoy it with their friends.
In other words, you're going to hit the people who are far, far more likely to be problem drinkers. The 83% of heavy drinkers who are drinking the cheap alcohol, whereas at the other end of the spectrum, moderate drinkers are very, very much less likely to be drinking.
Dr. Sarajov, is it likely to be introduced then, do you think, in other parts of the UK? If it is, I mean, what would be the marker of success in Scotland?
Well, I'd love to see what's happened in other countries where as you introduce minimum unit pricing, then you do have an impact. Where they've increased tax overall, A, it doesn't necessarily get passed on, and B, it does have much more of an effect. If we increase duty, which is the alternative, then actually it would have much more of an impact on responsible drinkers.
Well, the evidence that, Sarah, you brought up earlier about British Columbia, which is the place that this law has been sort of drawn from, is actually really misleading evidence. So there was a 1% rise in the alcohol price, and they said that it led to a 3% fall in violent crime. They then extrapolated this out, and they said that a 10% rise would lead to a 33% fall. Now, That extrapolation makes no sense. No statistician would say that that's good
Now,
evidence.
what if, once this is introduced in Scotland, it simply saved lives? Would that convince you?
Well, I would always be convinced by evidence. However, it's not likely to be borne out. There is no evidence that the elasticity, that people will change what they drink based on the price. What they'll do is they'll substitute. And will see an increase in the number of people who buy bootleg liquor, who find ways to go on booze cruises to England to stock up, who spend more of their income. The way that this will run in Scotland, I reckon we'll see no decrease in the, or at least a minimum.
On the one hand, you're saying that people are going to
we'll
stop eating breakfast. On the other hand, you're saying they're going to go on booze.
I think that they'll make.
It
I think
just
that they'll
doesn't
make
make
sense.
different
Yeah.
choices from what you.
All right, Dr. Sarah Jarvis, Matt Kilcoyne, thanks very much indeed.